that captures the entire spirit of what we're talking about today. This was written by a very old John Adams to his longtime rival and friend, Thomas Jefferson. And this wasn't just some personal, sentimental thing. It was this powerful recognition that their lifelong argument, well, that was the story of America. It was an explanation they felt they owed not just to each other, but to everyone who came after.
So let's start where they started, in a state of just complete uncertainty. You know, it's so easy for us to look back and think of the United States as this inevitable thing. But it wasn't. Not at all. The new nation was fragile, seriously teetering on the brink of collapse almost from day one.
Just look at the time frame here. We are covering more than 30 years. This wasn't one single crisis they got through. This was a decades-long, non-stop conversation about pure survival. From a desperate wartime plea from Governor Jefferson in 1781, all the way to the final reflective letters between two ex-presidents. These letters are like a running commentary on a nation that was constantly in danger.
And this quote from John Jay, wow, it just perfectly sums up the problem. Now, this isn't some radical outsider complaining. This is John Jay, a top diplomat, a key figure. And in 1786, he's basically writing to Jefferson and saying, the whole system we have, the Articles of Confederation, it's broken. It's fundamentally wrong. The government was designed to be weak, and that weakness was becoming a fatal flaw.
So what did that weakness actually look like? Well, for starters, a nation completely encircled by enemies. As George Washington wrote in his letters, you had Spain stirring up trouble with tribes in the South, you had Great Britain doing the exact same thing in the West. There was this very real fear that these old European empires were basically teaming up to strangle the young republic in its cradle. And internally, things were just as bad. Years earlier, right in the middle of the Revolution, Governor Jefferson had to fire off a desperate letter to Washington, literally begging for his personal aid because Virginia was being invaded. This was their reality, threats from the outside and total chaos on the inside.
So when you're faced with complete failure, what do? Well, they had to do something that had never really been done before, scrap their first government entirely and just start over. And this, of course, led to the Constitutional Convention and one of the most intense political debates in history.
And this was the central question, right? How do you create a government that's powerful enough to actually survive, but not so powerful that it crushes the very liberty you just fought a war to win? Jefferson was over in France at the time, serving as a diplomat, and he's following all of this from a distance, and his reaction is just a masterclass in critical thinking.
In this incredible letter to James Madison from 1787, Jefferson just lays it all out. What he liked was this solid structure, a government that could act on people directly, not just states, 3 separate branches, the power to tax. Smart stuff. But what he disliked, he really disliked. His number one problem, the thing that truly worried him, was the glaring lack of a Bill of Rights. Where was the guaranteed freedom of religion or freedom of the press? And he was deeply afraid of a president who could just get reelected forever, warning it could turn into an officer for life.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We've talked about the structure of government, the nuts and bolts. Now let's get into one of the most radical, most philosophical ideas Jefferson ever proposed, a concept that really challenged the very idea of what law and debt even mean.
In a 1789 letter, Jefferson argues that the earth belongs to the living generation. It's a natural right. And if that's true, then one generation can't force its debts or its laws onto the next one. As he put it, the dead have neither powers nor rights over it. I mean, that is a breathtakingly revolutionary idea. He's saying every law, every debt, maybe even the Constitution itself, ought to have an expiration date.
And he didn't just leave this as some vague philosophical idea. Oh no. Jefferson got out the mortality tables and actually calculated how long a generation lasts. His number? 19 years. So he proposed that every 19 years, the entire national slate should just be wiped clean. Can you imagine that? A society that completely reboots its legal and financial obligations every 2 decades.
Well, James Madison, who was always the practical one, gets this letter and writes back with this brilliant, gentle takedown. He raises some really serious questions, like, wouldn't a government that just expires every 19 years be way too unstable and chaotic? And what about all the good stuff past generations built? Don't we benefit from their roads and schools, and don't we owe them something for that? And what about a debt from a war fought for survival? That benefits future generations, so it's fair they help pay for it. Finally, he makes this great point about tacit consent. The idea that society works because we all sort of quietly agree to follow the old laws until we decide to change them. We need that continuity.
So even with a brand new constitution in place, the founders' deepest fear was still lurking. And that was the fear that the Republic wouldn't be destroyed by a foreign enemy, but would just tear itself apart from the inside.
You can just feel the anguish in George Washington's words in this letter from 1792. He's seeing all these threats from the outside, but he says the most serious, the most alarming, and the most afflicting danger is the political infighting happening inside his own administration. He's talking, of course, about the nasty escalating feud between his Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, and his Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton.
And Jefferson's letters from that same time show you exactly what Washington was so afraid of. The president is literally begging for unity, and Jefferson responds with this absolute torrent of accusations against Hamilton. He doesn't just say he disagrees with him. He claims Hamilton's entire financial system is designed to demolish the Republic, that he's created a corrupt squadron of congressmen in his pocket, and that his ultimate goal is to turn America into a monarchy. The battle for the soul of America wasn't being fought against some king across the ocean. It was happening right inside the president's own cabinet.
After years of this really bitter rivalry, a fight that led to a long and painful silence between them, we come to the final chapter. It's a reconciliation that ended up producing one of the most profound and fascinating conversations in American history.
This quote from John Adams, which he wrote soon after he and Jefferson started writing to each other again, is just extraordinary. Even as they're making up, he doesn't try to paper over their huge disagreements. He basically says, look, we fundamentally disagreed on how to run this country, and you know what? History will have to be the judge of who was right. It's this incredible moment of honesty and really humility.
And so for the last 14 years of their lives, these two giants, these old rivals, finally explained themselves to each other. They debated everything under the sun: philosophy, religion, the legacy of the revolution they had built side by side. In the end, they were kind of the last two great voices of that revolution, still talking, still arguing, still trying to make sense of the world they had created as it was all beginning to fade away.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. What their letters show us, more than anything, is that the American experiment was never a settled issue. It was always an argument, a conversation, a constant process of explaining and re-explaining. And if they, the people who actually created the nation, felt this urgent need to keep that debate going until their dying day, well, leaves us with a pretty important question.